Good morning on a very chilly Mildura morning. Welcome to Calvinian architecture, the fourth octave, third chapter, ersilia, verse 2, and if I can fit it in the time allotted to me, I will read you verse 3. Verse 2 is of a journey. Once, many years ago, I sailed the Tyrrhenian Sea with a friend from Venice. He lives in Mestre, actually, but his family originally came from Venice, only 15 kilometers away. Every time we found ourselves strolling in the Serenissima and we pass a certain spot near the Giardini, he points to a third-floor window in a grand old palace and tells me sottovoce that this is the window his grandmother threw herself from. His grandfather, on coming home for the midday meal, found her there on the pavement. At this point of the story, he usually indicates with an outstretched arm and index finger where the spot is. He found her there, at the bottom of the tall Egyptian odalisque that the fascisti had plundered from some Abyssinian town sometime through the 30s. There's usually a long silence after this. He cannot seem to loosen, let alone untie the bonds that stretch between that distant event and the now we find ourselves in. After his wife's death, his grandfather moved his family to Mestre, to the Terraferma, a world away, though I think only as far as from Northcote to St Kilda. So years ago, I sailed with this friend in a boat that had been lent to him by its wealthy owner. The 20-metre yacht was always moored just outside Genova, its crew ready to sail anytime the owner wished to do so. The yacht's name was Noah. We sailed from Genova to Corsica and Monte Cristo and past a myriad lonely rocks dotted through that sea. We spent a few ecstatic days gliding through crystal blue waves or anchored in the midst of a translucent indigo stillness, stretching above and below us as far as the eye could see. Each afternoon, I would lower myself into its transparency, hanging onto a tiny rope ladder fastened to the side of the boat, and I would paddle around close to its bulk, extending into the depths. I regretted not being able to allow myself to swim further away from it, to somehow separate myself from the safety of its buoyancy, even for a minute or two. To let myself feel utterly alone inside that sea. As we returned to port late on the final afternoon, I sat on the deck watching a distant storm on the horizon, thinking about the difference between understanding and experience. I'd been reading Shelley's Prometheus Unbound and his Ode to the West Wind each night in my bunk. I knew Shelley had drowned in these waters in 1822 and had subsequently been washed up on a bleak shore somewhere along the coast of Tuscany, north of Livorno, exactly to the starboard side of our then current position. We were at that moment alerted by the captain's anxious tone that the weather was about to worsen, and almost instantly the sea got rough. The sails were frantically lowered and everything movable got stowed away or secured. The storm was around and over us in an instant. The boat began rolling, violently groaning. The wind screamed through the masts. 3 times it rolled 360 degrees through water, foaming sky, then foaming water again, the cabin filled with it and other countless objects whirling now through its formerly benefic blueness. Toothbrushes, bottles, even a crucifix appeared out of somewhere. After some terrifying hours, the captain eventually steered us through a narrow opening between rocks and into a safe harbour. He'd been in radio contact with the rescue authorities. but it had been far too dangerous for any craft to come out to rescue us. There was a crowd on the dock clapping and cheering the safe return of a number of boats. We were taken to a bar at the far end of the harbour. The rescued immediately began to join in with the revellers, dancing wildly. I sat and looked on. I couldn't stop smiling, not only because it was so exhilarating to simply be alive, but because the seeming security of the Noah's buoyancy, so indisputable only minutes before the storm struck, had suddenly been revealed as utter illusion. How insignificant it had proved to be in the face of the storm, and yet we were still here. It was as though somehow conditions had been conjured up in which all my considerations could be weighed up and measured. Death had visited us on the Noah, and I'd been forced to abandon myself to her, a possibility I couldn't allow myself to even consider a few hours earlier, as I'd hung on to the rope ladder for dear life in the middle of that still and peaceful blueness, and then made to watch her decide for unfathomable reasons that this was not yet my time. In the bar, every now and then, I thought I could catch a reflection in the corner of my eye, multiplied sevenfold in the windows illuminated by a sign that said Bar Azzurro. I never told the story to anyone before. Perhaps I remember it so well only because of that. But then I'm not sure that it happened exactly this way. One thing I have a clear memory of is turning back once more to look at that sign, shedding blue light onto the darkened street after we left. Everything looked so melancholy suddenly, so ordinary, when inside that bar only moments earlier, I had never in my life felt so blessed. I stood there for a time watching it until the rain started again and my friend said, "Come, let's go." But I wanted to stay, just watching the sign pulse out like a big blue heartbeat onto that wet street, onto the streams and rivulets that were now beginning to run a deeper blue all across its surface. Verse 3. One of these houses is about my first house, if only it had been here in my life again. The house we lived in at the top of Mount Daniel on Corner Ridge and Observatory roads, just down from the Sky High restaurant. We'd bought it for $8,000. The mountain soil grew deep green broccoli and snow white cauliflowers and deep orange carrots. It had 12 walnut trees all in a row at the back of the land. From the top of it on a clear day you could see Port Phillip Bay. For the first 9 months, while the autumn, spring and winter sunshine flowed down and through the trees, and Emma was growing inside her mother's womb, I would all day long push sticks and branches into the soft earth, just gently, mind you, not too far in, and then I'd tie their tops together with pure white string that I'd buy from the Croydon market. Birds would come and perch in rows on the taut string architecture and then fly away at sundown back to their nearby nests. I'd do that all day long, and the dogs would walk around with me. Then in the morning I'd stay again. I'd pick all those sticks up wherever they'd fallen or had been dragged to by the wind or who knows what, and then tie them up again all to each other, nice and taut, and watch the birds returning to their day homes, a little change from the previous day, but nevertheless still theirs and only theirs. I must have walked for hundreds of miles in those 9 months, from morning till night, still exactly not sure why, but happy, so very happy too. Streams and rivulets. Until tomorrow.